Alright, UFC 312 is just around the corner and it's going down this Saturday. And honestly, it's kind of wild that we're already here. The main event is obviously Dricus du Plessis versus Sean Strickland 2. Now, I'll be real with you guys, I wasn't that excited for this rematch at first. I know there was controversy in their first fight. People were calling it a robbery and all that, but I was fully locked onto the idea of Hamzat versus DDP. That just felt like a way bigger fight. Two unstoppable forces clashing, but hey, at the end of the day, we're getting this rematch, and now the fight week is here. I'm actually starting to get hyped for it. The only downside is the card is rough. Like, if you go from the early prelims to the prelims to the main card, it's pretty underwhelming. I'm hoping the main event delivers because honestly, it's the only fight I really care about on this card. But knowing these two, I think they'll show up and make it worth the wait. Alright, so let's get on to it. The first fight was crazy controversial. Half the people thought Sean Strickland won and the other half said DDP clearly took it. Some scored it for Sean with round 1, 3, and 5, while others argued Dricus easily won round 2, 3, and 4. Either way, here we are again, back for the rematch. Now, I gotta be real with you guys. I'm leaning slightly towards DDP in this one. And it's not just a gut feeling, it's because the way that Strickland struggles against pressure fighters. We saw it in their first fight, whether Dricus pushed forward, Strickland just doesn't handle it well. His biggest issue was not countering those blitz effectively, and that's a huge reason why he could lose again. You see, Strickland's entire game is built around controlling range, walking guys down and picking them apart with his jab. But against Dricus, he kept getting forced backwards, and when DDP rushes in with those loopy shots, Strickland didn't make him pay. Instead, he shelled up, absorbed the pressure, and backed away, which only encouraged Dricus to keep coming forward. Now, don't get me wrong, the Philly shell is great for boxing heavy striking, no doubt about it. It's built around head movement, shoulder rolls, and parry punches. But here's the problem. It's not designed to deal with kicks. And in MMA, if you're not defending kicks properly, you're basically giving your opponent a free pass to chop you down. That's exactly what happened in Strickland's first fight with Dricus. His stance wide, lead hand low, shoulders up worked against boxers, but against a heavy kicked fighter, that lead leg is just sitting there waiting to be blasted. And since Strickland rarely checks kicks, he took a lot of damage early on. Once Dricus started hammering those leg kicks, Strickland's movement slowed down, his pressure wasn't as effective, and he had to play defense way more than he wanted to. So heading into the rematch, the big question is, does Strickland make the adjustments? Because if not, we might be looking at a repeat of their first fight with Dricus breaking him down piece by piece. One of the biggest issues with Strickland's defense outside of his vulnerability to kicks is his lack of traditional high guard. The Philly shell works great for deflecting straight punches, but against looping shots and head kicks, not so much. His right hand is usually floating around his chin or chest instead of being up high, which means if an opponent throws a wide hook or sets up a high kick properly, they have a clear lane to land. And that's exactly what happened in their first fight with Dricus du Plessis. You see, Dricus went wild with looping overhands, and a lot of them got through. Instead of slipping and countering like he usually does, Strickland ended up just eating the shot and backing up. And here's the thing, when you're consistently moving backwards while your opponent is throwing big aggressive strikes, even if they're not landing clean every time, the optics of the fight start shifting in their favor. That's why Dricus du Plessis looked like he was the one that was dictating the pace, even in the moments where Strickland wasn't necessarily hurt. And that leads to the final problem, Strickland's footwork-based defense. He's not a guy who checks a lot of kicks or shells up against a flurry. His style is all about controlling range, walking opponents down, and drowning them with volume. But with Dricus flipped the script and became the aggressor, consistently blitzing forward with his awkward yet effective combos. Strickland got stuck in retreat mode. Instead of steadying up the pace with his jab, he was on the back foot, forced to react instead of dictate until the later rounds. And look man, his style was kind of limited, but if Strickland actually wants to win this, he just needs to clean up some of the gaps that cost him the first fight. Like, the jab is already his best weapon, but in the first fight he wasn't throwing it enough in my opinion. He needs to throw it more to keep Dricus off of him. He doesn't need to change his striking, just be more aggressive with the jab, double it up, and actually make him hesitate before blitzing in. And speaking of those blitz, Strickland has to punish at least some of them. I'm not saying that he needs to turn into a counter puncher sniper, but if he keeps letting Dricus just crash forward without any consequences, he's gonna get steamrolled again. Even if he just lands a stiff jab or a straight right down the middle every time Dricus rushes in, that alone can make a difference. Another thing is, he can't keep backing up in straight lines like he did the first time. I'm not saying he needs to move like Israel Adesanya or anything, but simple pivots, little step sides, anything to stop himself from getting pushed into the cage that easily. And then there's the leg kicks. Look, I know he's never going to be a guy who checks kicks all night, but he has to do something about them. Even just lifting his leg occasionally or stepping out of range would be better than him just eating every single one of those like he did in the first fight. The last big thing he's got to do is move forward more often. Strickland is the best when he's pressuring, controlling the tempo, and forcing guys to fight at his pace. But in the first fight, he let Dricus dictate everything, and that just made his own game less effective. He doesn't need to become some completely different fighter. He just needs to do what he already does, but sharper. Look, if he can clean up those little areas, he gives himself a much better chance to win. But if he comes in and fights the same exact way he did last time, nothing is going to change, and we're going to see the same result all over again. But maybe I'm asking for too much, man, because I don't know if Strickland is going to do all that. He kind of fights the same way in all of his fights. That's the thing, you know? And we didn't even bring up the wrestling factor in this fight, because another huge factor could be Dricus wrestling, which can 100% open up his striking. Honestly, that might be the biggest benefit of mixing in more takedown attempts. It'll make Strickland second guess everything. You see, in the first fight, Dricus actually took Strickland down. He didn't do tons with it because Strickland got back up pretty quickly, but the fact that he was able to land a takedown at all is telling. If he can fully commit to the wrestling this time around, I think he'll have even more success. I mean, even in their first fight, he freaking suplexed him, dude. That alone showed that he's got the strength and technique to get Strickland down to the mat. The question is, can he keep him down there? If Dricus is smart, he'll mix in the takedowns just enough to make Strickland hesitate on the feet, because once you make a guy second guess his striking, then the striking starts opening up. Here's how. When Strickland is fully committed to defending strikes, he stays composed, the shoulder roll and counters well. But if Dricus is mixing in the level changes, Strickland has to start reacting differently. Instead of rolling with the shots or planting his feet for counters, he's gonna be hesitant. The moment he starts dropping his hands or leaning forward to anticipate a takedown, that's when Dricus can come over with the top with a big looping shot, just like he did in the first fight. One thing that keeps sticking out to me about Strickland's fights is how much he struggles against power punchers. And I'm not just talking about guys with one punch knockout power, I mean fighters who throw with real intent, guys who make their shots count. Look at the dudes that gave him problems: Dricus du Plessis, Jared Cannonier, Paulo Costa, and even Jack Hermanson to some extent. None of them are exactly elite technical when it comes to boxing, but they all have one thing in common: they hit hard and they don't let him control the pace, and they make him hesitate. Strickland's whole style is built around volume, pressure, and defense, like I've been saying for the 12th time. He's not a guy who's going to put you out with one big shot, so he has to break opponents down over time with his jab, his teeth, and his pace, and his ability to roll with the punches. But the moment he's in there with someone who can actually hurt him with a single shot, he dials it back a bit. He gets more cautious, taking fewer risks. And that's why so many of his fights against these guys end up being split decision, because he's not doing enough to clearly separate himself. Look at the Cannonier fight. That was a super close split decision, and a big reason why people leaned towards Cannonier was because he was landing the heavier shots. Even though Strickland outlanded him in total strikes, Cannonier's shots looked like they were just doing way more damage. And that's what the judges noticed. Same thing with Hermanson. Strickland technically landed more, but Jack was throwing more urgency, which made it another awkward close fight that went to split decision. And with Dricus, you can see the power difference was a big deal. Strickland was landing some clean shots, but every time Dricus blitzed in and connected, Strickland was backing up, getting overwhelmed. Not necessarily getting rocked, but it looked like he was the one that was on the losing end of the exchange. And that's the problem. Strickland doesn't have that kind of power that swings rounds in his favor. If he's fighting another volume guy like a Uriah Hall or a Brendan Allen, he looks incredible because he gets to dictate everything. But against a power puncher, he can't afford to trade bombs. So he gets a little too defensive, and that ends up costing him. That's what makes this rematch with Dricus so dangerous for him. If Strickland doesn't make some kind of adjustment, we're probably going to see the same fight all over again. Dricus blitzing in, landing some big shots, And even if Strickland is technically landing more, the judges are gonna favor the guy who looks like he's doing the more damage. He's gotta find a way to offset that power, whether it's countering more aggressively, controlling the tempo better, or mixing in the clinch work. But if he just tries to outpoint Dricus in a slow pace striking match while Dricus is throwing bombs, he's leaving it in the hands of the judges. And history has told us that usually doesn't go well for him.